I never thought buying a house in Oakville, Pennsylvania would land me in the middle of a legal war that would consume the next year of my life. But there I was, standing in my front yard watching bulldozers tear into what I later learned was sacred ground. My name is Thomas Xavier, and I had just moved into Meadowbrook Estates 6 months earlier. The development was one of those cookie-cutter suburban neighborhoods where every third house looked identical, where the grass had to be exactly 2.5 inches tall, and where the HOA rules were thicker than the mortgage documents. I should have known better, really. My real estate agent had warned me that the HOA was strict, but I figured I could handle following a few rules about paint colors and lawn maintenance. What I didn't anticipate was that the HOA president, a woman named Patricia Henderson, would turn out to be the kind of person who measured your grass with a ruler and sent violation notices if your garbage cans were visible from the street for more than 2 hours after pickup. Patricia was in her early 50s with that helmet of blonde highlights that never moved and an expression that suggested she had been personally offended by the existence of joy itself. She drove a white Lexus SUV with a bumper sticker that read "My HOA, My Rules," which I initially thought was a joke until I realized she had commissioned them herself and distributed them to the board members. The trouble started in March when I received a newsletter in my mailbox announcing the HOA's latest improvement project. They were planning to build a community wellness path that would wind through the undeveloped section of the neighborhood, a plot of land at the eastern edge that had remained untouched since the development was built 5 years ago. The path would be paved with decorative concrete, lined with benches and LED lighting, and would feature educational plaques about local wildlife. The assessment came to $300 per household, non-negotiable, due within 30 days. I wasn't thrilled about the extra expense, but the path itself seemed harmless enough. That undeveloped section was just an overgrown field with some old trees and what looked like scattered rocks half buried in the weeds. I had walked through there once when I first moved in, curious about the property boundaries. There were some weathered stones that might have been markers of some kind, but they were so worn down I couldn't read anything on them. I assumed they were old survey markers or something equally mundane. The construction began on a Monday morning in early April. I was working from home trying to focus on a conference call about quarterly sales projections when the sound of heavy machinery drowned out my client's voice. I looked out my window and saw a parade of construction vehicles rolling down the street toward the empty lot. Patricia's white Lexus led the procession like a general heading into battle. By Wednesday, they had cleared about half the field. I watched during my lunch break as the bulldozer pushed aside brush and small trees, carving out the path that would curve through the property. The operator was good at his job, moving efficiently and following the stakes that marked the planned route. I noticed Patricia standing at the edge of the worksite, clipboard in hand, checking her watch every few minutes like she was timing how fast they could finish. That Thursday afternoon, everything changed. I was taking out my trash when I heard shouting coming from the construction site. Not the usual construction crew banter, but real anger. I walked down the street to see what was happening and found a small crowd gathering near the bulldozer. A man in his 60s, with gray hair pulled back in a ponytail and wearing jeans and a denim jacket, was standing between the bulldozer and the path it had been clearing. His face was red with fury. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" he was shouting at Patricia, who had her arms crossed and her chin up in that defensive posture I had come to recognize. "This is a burial ground. These are graves. You just drove a bulldozer over my ancestors." Patricia's response was exactly what I would have expected from her. "Sir, you need to leave this property immediately. This is private land owned by the Meadowbrook Estates HOA, and you are trespassing. I will call the police if you do not leave right now." "Call them," the man shot back. "I want them here. I want them to see what you have done. This land was never supposed to be developed. There are protections in place." I moved closer, trying to understand what was happening. Several other neighbors had gathered now, including Marcus Chen from 3 doors down and elderly Mrs. Patterson, who lived across from the construction site. The construction crew had stopped working and were standing by their equipment, clearly uncomfortable with the confrontation. "What is he talking about?" I asked Marcus quietly. "No idea," Marcus whispered back, "but he seems pretty upset." The gray-haired man pulled out his phone and made a call, speaking rapidly to someone on the other end. Patricia checked her watch again and turned to the construction foreman. "Continue working," she ordered. "Madam, maybe we should hold off until this gets sorted out," the foreman said, clearly not wanting to be part of whatever was unfolding. "You are being paid to pave a path, not to make legal decisions," Patricia snapped. "The HOA has every right to develop this land. Now get back to work or I will find a crew that will." The foreman looked at his bulldozer operator and shrugged. The operator climbed back into his machine, but before he could start the engine, 2 more cars pulled up. An older woman and a younger man, probably in his 30s, got out and rushed over to join the gray-haired man. The woman looked like she had been crying, her eyes red and puffy. "Robert, is it true?" she asked the gray-haired man. "Did they really dig it up?" Robert nodded grimly and pointed to where the bulldozer had carved through the earth. I followed his gesture and for the first time noticed what I had missed before. Among the disturbed soil were fragments of what looked like very old wood, darkened with age. And there, partially exposed by the excavation, was something that made my stomach drop. It was clearly a bone, yellowed and ancient, protruding from the dirt. The woman let out a sound that was half gasp, half sob. Oh God, no!" Patricia remained unmoved. "That could be anything. This land has been surveyed multiple times. There are no registered burial grounds anywhere in this development." "Because your developer friends made sure it wasn't registered properly," Robert shot back. "My family has known about this burial ground for 200 years. Just because it wasn't on your modern paperwork doesn't mean it doesn't exist." The younger man had his phone out and was taking pictures of everything: the disturbed earth, the exposed bone, Patricia standing with her clipboard. "This is going straight to our lawyer," he said, "and to the State Historical Society." Patricia's face was reddening now, her composure starting to crack. "You people need to leave immediately, or I will have you arrested for trespassing and interfering with authorized construction." "These people," the woman repeated, her voice rising. "These people? This is our family burial ground. Our ancestors rest here. My great-great-great-grandmother is buried somewhere in this field, and you just drove a bulldozer over her." I felt sick. The crowd of neighbors had grown larger, and I could hear murmuring behind me. Mrs. Patterson was shaking her head, looking horrified. Marcus had his phone out, recording the confrontation. "I am calling the police," Patricia announced, pulling out her phone. "Good," Robert said. "Please do. I want this documented officially." 2 police officers arrived about 15 minutes later. In that time, the 3 visitors had been walking around the disturbed area, taking more photos and marking spots with small flags they had pulled from their car. Patricia had retreated to her Lexus but remained on site, making phone calls. The construction crew had given up any pretense of working and were sitting on their equipment, watching the drama unfold. The officers, a middle-aged man with a thick mustache and a younger woman with sharp eyes, got out of their patrol car and immediately looked confused by the scene. Patricia rushed over to them before anyone else could speak. "Officers, thank goodness you are here. These people are trespassing on HOA property and preventing authorized construction work. I need them removed immediately." The older officer held up his hand. "Madam, slow down. Let's take this one step at a time. I'm Officer Briggs. This is Officer Yun. Who wants to tell me what is going on here?" Robert stepped forward, his initial anger now replaced with a grim determination. "My name is Robert Whitfield. This land we are standing on contains a burial ground that has been used by my family and other families in this area since the late 1700s. The HOA began construction on this land without proper archaeological survey or consultation with descendants, and in doing so, they have disturbed human remains." He pointed to the exposed bone, which was now clearly visible to everyone. Officer Yun walked over to look at it, her expression growing serious. "Is that what I think it is?" she asked her partner. Officer Briggs joined her and crouched down, examining the bone without touching it. "We need to stop all work immediately," he said, standing up and turning to the construction foreman. "Nobody touches anything else on this site until we get some experts out here." Patricia protested immediately. "You cannot shut down authorized construction based on the word of some random person who shows up claiming family history. We have permits. We have approvals from the township. This is private property. Madam, if those are human remains, this becomes a criminal investigation," Officer Briggs said firmly. "We need to contact the county coroner and possibly the state archaeologist. All work stops now." The construction crew didn't need to be told twice. They started packing up their equipment, clearly relieved to have an excuse to leave. Patricia looked like she wanted to argue further, but even she seemed to recognize that fighting with the police was a losing battle. Officer Yun was taking statements from Robert and the 2 people with him, who I learned were his sister Margaret Whitfield and his nephew David Whitfield. They explained that their family had maintained records of the burial ground for generations, passing down the knowledge through oral history and written documents. The land had originally been part of a larger farm property owned by the Whitfield family and several other families in the 1700s. When the land was sold off piece by piece over the centuries, the burial ground was supposed to be protected, but somewhere along the way, the protections had been lost or ignored. "We have deeds, letters, even some photographs from the early 1900s showing the grave markers," Margaret explained, her voice still shaky. "When we heard that this development was being built 5 years ago, we tried to contact the developers, but they never returned our calls. We thought maybe they were going to preserve this section." We never imagined they would sell it to the HOA for a walking path. I listened to all of this feeling increasingly disturbed. I had paid good money to live in this neighborhood, and now it was turning out that the entire development might be built on questionable ground. More than that, I was disgusted that Patricia and the HOA board had apparently done zero due diligence before starting this project. The police cordoned off the construction site with yellow tape, and Officer Briggs made several phone calls. Within an hour, a representative from the county coroner's office arrived, followed by someone from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission. They confirmed that the exposed bone was indeed human and appeared to be very old. The archaeologist would need to be brought in for a proper assessment, but in the meantime the site was officially closed pending investigation. Patricia left in a fury, her white Lexus peeling out of the neighborhood with enough force to leave rubber marks on the street. The Whitfield family stayed until sunset, standing vigil over the disturbed ground. I went home feeling shaken by what I had witnessed. The next morning, my doorbell rang at 7 a.m. I stumbled downstairs in my pajamas to find Patricia standing on my porch with two other women I recognized as HOA board members, Susan Martinez, the treasurer, and Jennifer Cole, the secretary. All three of them had matching expressions of determination. "Tom Xavier?" Patricia asked, even though she obviously knew who I was. I said warily. "As a homeowner in Meadowbrook Estates, you are required to attend an emergency HOA meeting tonight at 7 p.m. in the community center. Attendance is mandatory per Section 12 of your HOA agreement." I blinked at her. "What is this about?" "The board needs to discuss our response to yesterday's incident and vote on our legal strategy. Every homeowner needs to be present." She thrust a piece of paper at me and then turned on her heel, marching to the next house with Susan and Jennifer following like ducklings behind their mother. I looked at the paper. It was a formal meeting notice, printed on official HOA letterhead, with the agenda listed in bullet points. The main item was titled Response to Whitfield Family Claims and Continuation of Wellness Path Project. I spent the day doing research online, trying to understand what kind of legal trouble we might all be in. What I found was not encouraging. Pennsylvania had strict laws about burial grounds, especially historic ones. Disturbing graves without proper authority could result in criminal charges, civil penalties, and mandatory restoration costs. If the Whitfield family could prove that this was indeed a protected burial ground, the HOA could be facing massive fines and lawsuits. At 7 p.m. I walked into the community center to find it packed. Every chair was filled, and people were standing along the walls. The tension in the room was palpable. Patricia sat at a table at the front with Susan and Jennifer flanking her. A man in a suit sat next to them, whom Patricia introduced as Howard Grant, the HOA's attorney. Patricia called the meeting to order by banging a gavel on the table, which seemed unnecessarily dramatic but perfectly in character for her. "Thank you all for coming. I know there has been some concern about yesterday's events, but I want to assure everyone that the HOA board has the situation under control. Mr. Grant, would you please explain our legal position?" Howard Grant stood up, adjusting his tie. He was probably in his 40s, with the kind of smooth manner that came from years of telling people what they wanted to hear. "Ladies and gentlemen, the HOA is on solid legal footing here. The land in question is owned outright by the Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. It was properly purchased from the developer, with clear title and no encumbrances. The Wellness Path project was approved by the board following all proper procedures, and all necessary permits were obtained from the township." A hand shot up from the audience. It was Marcus Chen. "What about the burial ground? What about the human remains that were found?" Howard smiled in that patronizing way lawyers have. "The claims made by the Whitfield family are unsubstantiated. They have provided no concrete proof that this land contains a protected burial ground. A single bone fragment does not constitute proof of a cemetery. It could be from an animal, or it could be an isolated burial that has no legal protection. Until and unless the State Archaeological Survey comes back with definitive proof, we are proceeding on the assumption that our property rights are valid." "That seems incredibly risky." Someone else called out. It was Dr. Sarah Morrison, a professor who lived 2 streets over. "If they do find proof, we could all be liable for damages." "The HOA will indemnify all homeowners," Patricia interjected. "This is an HOA matter, not a personal liability issue." "With what money?" Marcus challenged. "Our reserve fund is not exactly overflowing. If we get hit with major fines or a lawsuit, where is that money coming from?" "We will deal with that if it becomes necessary," Patricia said sharply. "Right now, we need to show a united front. The Whitfield family is trying to bully us into abandoning a project that will benefit all homeowners. We cannot let them succeed." I raised my hand, and Patricia reluctantly acknowledged me. "Tom Xavier, correct? You are one of our newer residents." "Yes. I am just wondering if maybe we should wait for the archaeological survey before moving forward. If there really are graves there, continuing construction would be not just illegal but morally wrong." The room erupted in murmurs, some agreeing with me and others clearly on Patricia's side. Patricia banged her gavel again. The point of this meeting is not to debate the morality of our legal rights. The point is to vote on whether to continue defending the HOA's position or to capitulate to the Whitfield family's demands. I move that we authorize Mr. Grant to fight any attempts to stop our Wellness Path project. I second that motion, Susan Martinez said immediately. All in favor? Patricia called out. About half the room raised their hands. Patricia's faction was strong but not overwhelming. All opposed? The other half raised their hands, including me. We were almost evenly split. Patricia frowned at the result. The motion passes with a simple majority. Mr. Grant, you are authorized to proceed with defending the HOA's interests. Wait a minute. Dr. Morrison stood up. That is not how this works. Major expenditures require a 2/3 majority according to our bylaws. Hiring lawyers to fight a lawsuit definitely counts as a major expenditure. Patricia's face went red. This is not a new expenditure. Mr. Grant is already our attorney of record. But you are asking him to take on new work that could cost tens of thousands of dollars or more, Dr. Morrison countered. That requires a proper vote with proper notice. Howard Grant whispered something to Patricia, who looked even more annoyed. Fine. We will have a formal vote at next month's regular meeting. In the meantime, Mr. Grant will provide consultation on an as-needed basis within the current budget. The meeting dissolved into smaller arguments after that, with people breaking into groups and debating among themselves. I left feeling more anxious than when I arrived. This was spiraling into something much bigger than a simple construction dispute. Over the next 2 weeks, the state archaeologist arrived with a team and began a systematic survey of the land. They set up a grid pattern and carefully excavated small test pits across the entire field. I watched from my window as they worked, methodical and thorough. The Whitfield family was there every day, observing and documenting. The results came back on a Tuesday. The state archaeologist's report confirmed that the site contained at least 47 identifiable graves dating from approximately 1770 to 1820. The grave markers had been removed or destroyed at some point in the past, probably during farming operations in the late 1800s, but the graves themselves remained intact, until the bulldozer had torn through 3 of them. The state issued an immediate cease and desist order on any further development of the land and opened an investigation into how the development had been approved in the first place. It turned out that the original developer had done a Phase 1 environmental survey that should have included a historical records search, but that search had been cursory at best. The Whitfield family's attempts to contact the developer had been deliberately ignored. On the last Friday of April, exactly 3 weeks after the bulldozer had first disturbed the graves, the Whitfield family filed a lawsuit, not just against the HOA, but against the individual board members, the development company that had built Meadowbrook Estates, and the township for approving the development without proper historical review. The lawsuit alleged violation of Pennsylvania's cemetery and burial grounds laws, desecration of graves, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and negligence. The damages sought were substantial. $5 million in compensatory damages, $10 million in punitive damages, plus costs for proper archaeological excavation, reburial of disturbed remains, and perpetual care of the burial ground. When the lawsuit papers were served, Patricia called another emergency meeting. This time, the community center was beyond capacity, with people spilling out into the parking lot. Patricia looked haggard, her usual perfect appearance showing cracks. Her hair was slightly disheveled, and I could see smudges under her eyes that her makeup did not quite cover. As you all know by now, the HOA has been named in a lawsuit by the Whitfield family, she began, her voice tight. Our attorney believes we have strong defenses, but this is going to be expensive to fight. We are looking at legal fees that could exceed $200,000. The room exploded. People were shouting, demanding to know how this had happened, why the board had not done proper research before starting the project. Marcus Chen was on his feet, his voice cutting through the chaos. This is insane. You are asking us to pay for your incompetence. You should have verified that the land was clear before starting construction. This is on the board, not on the homeowners. The board acted in good faith based on the information we had, Jennifer Cole protested. We relied on the developer's representations that the land was clear for development. Did you do any independent research? Dr. Morrison asked. Did you check historical records? Did you consult with the County Historical Society? The silence from the board table answered the question. They had done nothing. They had just assumed everything was fine and charged ahead. I move for the immediate recall of the entire HOA board, Marcus announced. We need new leadership that will actually protect the interests of homeowners instead of exposing us to massive liability. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Patricia banged her gavel so hard I thought she might break it. You cannot just recall the board because you disagree with one decision. Actually, we can, Dr. Morrison said, pulling out a copy of the HOA bylaws. Section 18 allows for recall of board members with a petition signed by 30% of homeowners, followed by a vote requiring a simple majority. I am happy to start circulating that petition right now. I signed the petition that night, along with more than half the neighborhood. Within 3 days, we had well over the 30% required. Patricia and her board tried to fight it, claiming the petition was invalid on various technicalities. But Howard Grant quietly advised them that fighting it would only make things worse. The recall vote was held 2 weeks later. Patricia Henderson, Susan Martinez, and Jennifer Cole were removed from the board by a vote of 78% of homeowners. Dr. Morrison was elected as the new president, Marcus Chen as vice president, and I somehow found myself voted in as treasurer, probably because I had accounting experience from my sales job. Our first act as the new board was to settle with the Whitfield family. We did not have $15 million, obviously, but we could negotiate. Dr. Morrison met with Robert Whitfield and his attorney, and over the course of several meetings, they hammered out an agreement. The HOA would pay for a complete archaeological survey of the burial ground, proper reburial of the disturbed remains according to Whitfield family traditions, and installation of appropriate memorials and fencing to protect the site in perpetuity. The total cost came to $350,000. In exchange, the Whitfield family would drop the lawsuit against the HOA and the individual homeowners. Though they continued their suit against the developer and the township, we did not have $350,000 in our reserves. We had about $40,000. That meant a special assessment on every homeowner. With 86 homes in the development, it worked out to about $4,000 per household, due immediately. The announcement of the assessment went over about as well as you would expect. People were furious, even though most understood it was necessary to avoid a judgment that could have been much worse. Several homeowners threatened to sue the former board members personally, and a few actually did file claims against Patricia Henderson for gross negligence in her duties. I had to take out a loan to pay my assessment, which hurt, but I paid it. Most people did, though some needed payment plans. The money was placed in escrow, and the archaeological work began in June. The archaeologists spent 3 months carefully excavating and documenting the burial ground. They found 62 graves in total, far more than the initial survey had indicated. Most contained complete skeletons, and the archaeologists were able to determine ages, probable causes of death, and in some cases identify individuals based on burial goods and the Whitfield family's historical records. The 3 graves that had been disturbed by the bulldozer were painstakingly reassembled. The remains were treated with respect and care, cleaned and documented, and then prepared for reburial. The Whitfield family held a ceremony in September, inviting all the homeowners to attend. About 30 of us showed up, including me. It was a beautiful autumn day with the leaves just starting to turn. The burial ground had been cleared of all the construction debris and carefully landscaped. The archaeologists had placed small markers at each grave site, and a larger memorial stone listed all the identified individuals buried there. Robert Whitfield stood before the gathered crowd, his sister Margaret beside him, and spoke about his ancestors. These people were farmers, laborers, freedmen, and their families, he said, his voice carrying across the quiet field. They worked this land, raised their children here, and when they died, their families laid them to rest in this place. They were forgotten for a long time, but they are not forgotten anymore. Thank you to all of you who have worked to make this right. It was one of the most moving experiences of my life. Standing there among those graves, I felt the weight of history in a way I never had before. These were not just abstract names or dates. These were real people who had lived and loved and died, and their final resting place deserved respect. The reburial ceremony was conducted according to traditions that the Whitfield family had researched and reconstructed. There were prayers, songs, and offerings of flowers and tobacco. When it was over, we all stood in silence for a long moment before quietly dispersing. The legal aftermath dragged on for months. Patricia Henderson was sued by 7 different homeowners for negligence and breach of fiduciary duty. Most of those cases settled out of court, with Patricia's homeowner's insurance covering most of the costs. She and her husband sold their house in November and moved out of state. I heard through the neighborhood gossip network that she blamed everyone but herself for what had happened. Susan Martinez and Jennifer Cole also faced legal consequences, though less severe than Patricia's. They settled with the homeowners who sued them and quietly resigned from any community involvement. Both still lived in the neighborhood but kept low profiles. The developer of Meadowbrook Estates, a company called Keystone Properties LLC, settled with the Whitfield family for an undisclosed sum rumored to be in the low 7 figures. The settlement included funding for perpetual care of the burial ground and a scholarship fund in honor of the people buried there. The township also settled, agreeing to implement new procedures for reviewing development applications to ensure historical and archaeological concerns were properly addressed. As for the HOA's wellness path, that project was obviously canceled. The money that had been collected in the original $300 assessment was refunded to homeowners, which was small consolation given the $4,000 assessment that followed. Dr. Morrison, as the new HOA president, proposed using some of the remaining reserve funds to build a much smaller walking path that would run along the existing streets of the neighborhood, avoiding any undeveloped land. That proposal was approved unanimously. The burial ground itself became a permanent protected site. The Whitfield family established a nonprofit organization to maintain it, with quarterly volunteer days for cleaning and upkeep. I started attending those volunteer days, helping to pull weeds and plant flowers around the memorial stones. It felt like the least I could do. In December, nearly 9 months after the bulldozer had first disturbed those graves, I attended the final HOA meeting of the year. The budget had been approved, the new walking path was under construction, and we had hired a professional management company to handle day-to-day operations so that no future board could make decisions as reckless as Patricia's had been. Dr. Morrison stood at the front of the community center and addressed the room. I know this has been an incredibly difficult year for everyone. We have all paid a heavy price, both financially and emotionally, for mistakes that should never have been made. But I hope we have also learned something valuable. Our actions have consequences, especially when we fail to do our due diligence and respect the history of the land we live on. Moving forward, this HOA will operate with transparency, with careful research, and with respect for all stakeholders, living and dead. The room applauded, and I joined in. It was not a happy ending, exactly. We were all out thousands of dollars. Our property values had taken a hit from the negative publicity, and the trust in HOA governance had been shattered. But at least the burial ground was protected now. At least those forgotten souls had been remembered and honored. I walked home that night through the decorated streets of Meadowbrook Estates. Christmas lights twinkled on houses, and I could smell wood smoke from someone's fireplace. It looked like a perfect suburban neighborhood, peaceful and prosperous. But I knew better now. I knew that beneath the surface of any place there were layers of history, of lives lived and lost, of mistakes made and consequences faced. The memorial stone at the burial ground was visible from the street, illuminated by the LED lights we had installed. It read, "In memory of those who rest here, 1770-1820. May they never be forgotten again." The Whitfield family had chosen those words, and I thought they were perfect. As I unlocked my front door, I reflected on how much had changed since that March morning when I had first heard the bulldozers rumbling down the street. I had learned that HOA boards could wield enormous power with little oversight. I had learned that greed and incompetence could lead to devastating consequences. I had learned that history did not stay buried, no matter how much people wanted to ignore it. But I had also learned that communities could come together to make things right, even at great cost. I had learned that some fights were worth fighting, not for personal gain but for simple justice. And I had learned that the dead deserve respect, regardless of how long they have been gone. In January, the new year brought new developments. The Pennsylvania Attorney General's office, which had been quietly investigating the entire situation, announced criminal charges against Patricia Henderson and 2 executives from Keystone Properties LLC. The charges included desecration of a burial place, criminal mischief, and conspiracy to defraud. Apparently, the investigation had uncovered evidence that Patricia had been warned by a township clerk that the land might have historical significance, but she had ignored that warning and pushed the project forward anyway. The Keystone executives had been even worse, deliberately suppressing the Whitfield family's complaints and falsifying environmental review documents. The criminal trial was scheduled for May, over a year after the bulldozer had first torn into those graves. I was called as a witness, along with most of the other homeowners who had been present during the initial confrontation. I took the stand on a Tuesday morning and described what I had seen and heard. Patricia's dismissive attitude toward the Whitfield family, her insistence that the construction continue even after human remains had been found, her threats to have Robert Whitfield arrested for trespassing. The prosecutor, a sharp woman in her 30s named Angela Zimmerman, walked me through every detail. "Mr. Xavier, in your observation, did Ms. Henderson show any concern for the possibility that she might be disturbing graves?" "No," I answered honestly. "She seemed entirely focused on completing the project on schedule. She treated the Whitfield family like they were being unreasonable, like they were just trying to cause problems. And when the police arrived and identified what appeared to be human remains, what was Ms. Henderson's reaction? She argued with them. She insisted the construction should continue. She only backed down when the officer made it clear that it was now a criminal investigation." Patricia sat at the defense table looking smaller than I remembered her. Her helmet hair was gone, replaced with a simple style that made her look older and more tired. Her attorney objected frequently, but the evidence against her was overwhelming. The jury deliberated for less than 3 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. Patricia Henderson was sentenced to 2 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. The Keystone executives received similar sentences. The judge, an older man with a grave expression, made a statement before sentencing that stuck with me. The law recognizes the special sanctity of burial places, he said. When we die, we trust that our final resting place will be treated with dignity and respect. The defendants in this case violated that trust in the most callous manner imaginable. They prioritized convenience and profit over the most basic human decency. Their actions not only broke the law but offended our common moral sensibilities. Therefore, the court has no choice but to impose substantial prison time to reflect the seriousness of these offenses. I left the courthouse feeling a grim satisfaction. Justice had been done, at least in the legal sense. Patricia was going to prison, the Keystone executives were going to prison, and everyone involved had paid a price for their actions. Back in Meadowbrook Estates, life slowly returned to normal. The new walking path along the streets was completed in March, exactly a year after the ill-fated Wellness Path project had begun. It was modest but nice, with benches at regular intervals and small gardens planted by volunteers. It cost about $30,000 total, funded entirely from HOA reserves with no special assessment required. The burial ground remained a centerpiece of the neighborhood, though not in the way Patricia had intended. The Whitfield family's nonprofit organization expanded its mission to include educational programs about local history. They organized tours of the burial ground, explaining who was buried there and what life had been like in 18th century Pennsylvania. Schools brought students to visit, and historians came to study the site. It became a source of pride for the neighborhood, a connection to the past that enriched the present. In April, I attended a community gathering at the burial ground to mark the 1-year anniversary of its rediscovery. The Whitfield family had organized a remembrance ceremony, and over 100 people showed up, including many who did not live in Meadowbrook Estates. Robert Whitfield spoke again, but this time his tone was one of gratitude rather than anger. "A year ago, this place was nearly destroyed," he said. "My family was heartbroken, furious, and afraid that our ancestors would be lost forever. But something remarkable happened. This community, your community, stepped up. You held your leaders accountable. You paid to make things right. You turned what could have been a tragedy into something meaningful. My family will be forever grateful." Margaret Whitfield unveiled a new addition to the memorial, a bronze plaque listing all the homeowners who had contributed to the restoration fund. My name was there, along with everyone else who had paid the special assessment. It felt strange to see my name on something permanent like that, but also appropriate. We had all been part of this, for better or worse. As spring turned to summer, the burial ground became a gathering place. People brought picnic blankets and sat at the edges, respecting the graves but enjoying the peaceful atmosphere. The Whitfield family welcomed this, saying their ancestors would have been happy to know the place brought joy to the living as well as honoring the dead. I spent a lot of time there myself, often in the evenings after work. There was something calming about the place, something that helped me put my own problems in perspective. When I got stressed about sales quotas or difficult clients, I would walk to the burial ground and sit on one of the benches. Looking at those memorial stones, thinking about people who had lived 250 years ago, my problems seemed smaller and more manageable. In June, I ran into Marcus Chen at the burial ground. He was there with his 2 kids, explaining to them about the history of the place. His daughter, maybe 8 years old, was studying one of the markers intently. "Daddy, it says this person was only 6 when they died," she said sadly. "That's younger than me." "Life was harder back then," Marcus explained gently. "Medicine was not as good, and people got sick more often. That is why it is important to be grateful for what we have and to take care of our health." His son, a few years older, was more interested in the archaeology. "Did they really find all these graves with shovels and brushes? That must have taken forever." "It did," I interjected, and Marcus waved hello. "The archaeologists worked all summer. They were very careful to make sure they did not damage anything." "Are you Mr. Xavier?" the boy asked. "My dad says you helped stop the bad people who were wrecking the graves." I laughed. "I did not do much. I just voted the right way and paid my assessment like everyone else." "That is doing something," Marcus said seriously. "A lot of people do not even do that much. They complain but then do not act. You acted, and it mattered." We talked for a while longer, and then Marcus took his kids home for dinner. I stayed a bit longer, watching the sun set over the memorial stones. The evening light turned everything golden, and for a moment I could almost imagine what this place had looked like centuries ago, when it was farmland and the families gathered here to bury their loved ones. By July, the neighborhood had fully adapted to having the burial ground as a permanent feature. Property values, which had dipped sharply in the immediate aftermath of the scandal, were starting to recover. Potential buyers actually seemed to appreciate the historical significance of the area. One couple who moved in down the street told me they had chosen Meadowbrook Estates specifically because of the burial ground and the community's response to the crisis. "It shows that people here care about doing the right thing," the wife said. "That matters more to us than perfect lawns and strict HOA rules." The new HOA board under Dr. Morrison's leadership had indeed relaxed many of the more ridiculous rules. Garbage cans no longer had to be invisible within 2 hours. Grass could be 3 inches instead of 2.5. Holiday decorations could stay up an extra week. We focused on genuine community needs rather than petty enforcement. In August, I was re-elected as treasurer, running unopposed. I had not particularly wanted the position, but I had come to feel a sense of responsibility for it. We needed to rebuild trust in the HOA, and that meant transparent financial management and careful decision-making. I published detailed monthly financial reports and held quarterly open forums where any homeowner could ask questions about how their money was being spent. One of those forums in September brought an unexpected proposal. A young couple, newcomers to the neighborhood, suggested creating a community garden on another small undeveloped parcel of land near the community center. This time, however, the process was completely different from the disastrous Wellness Path project. First, we hired a professional archaeological consulting firm to survey the land. They did a thorough records search, consulted with the County Historical Society, and even reached out to the Whitfield family to see if they had any knowledge of the area. Only after receiving a clean report did we proceed. Then we held multiple community meetings to discuss the design, the costs, and the maintenance plan. We created a committee of volunteers to manage the garden. We got input from neighbors about what they wanted to see. The entire process took 4 months, but when we finally broke ground in January of the following year, everyone felt good about it. The community garden was a success. People grew vegetables, herbs, and flowers. Kids from the neighborhood helped with planting and harvesting. We donated excess produce to a local food bank. It became exactly the kind of community building project that the Wellness Path had been supposed to be, but done right this time. In February, 2 years after the bulldozer had first disturbed those graves, I attended a ceremony at the burial ground for the installation of the final memorial element, a small pavilion with informational panels about the site's history and significance. The Whitfield family had raised additional funds through their nonprofit, and the pavilion was beautiful, with a copper roof and stone pillars that echoed the historic architecture of the area. At the dedication ceremony, David Whitfield, Robert's nephew, spoke about how the experience had changed his perspective. "When this started, I was so angry I could barely think straight," he admitted. "I wanted everyone involved to suffer as much as possible, but over time I realized that anger was not going to bring my ancestors peace. What brought peace was seeing this community take responsibility, make amends, and create something lasting and meaningful. My children will grow up knowing that their ancestors are honored and remembered. That means everything." I thought about that word, responsibility, a lot in the months that followed. Patricia Henderson had refused to take responsibility until she had no choice. The Keystone executives had done the same. They had tried to hide, deflect, and deny until the legal system forced them to face consequences. But the rest of us, the ordinary homeowners of Meadowbrook Estates, had chosen to take responsibility even though we had not made the initial mistakes. We could have fought the Whitfield family, dragged out the litigation, maybe even won on some technicality. Instead, we had chosen to do the right thing, expensive as it was. That choice had cost me $4,000, money I could have used for a dozen other things. But looking back, I did not regret it. That money had bought something more valuable than a walking path or lower assessments. It had bought peace of mind, knowing that I lived in a community that valued justice over convenience. In March, the anniversary of the original incident, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA and the Whitfield Family Heritage Foundation jointly announced the creation of an annual Memorial Day. Every year on the first Saturday in April, we would gather at the burial ground for a ceremony of remembrance with speakers, music, and a community meal afterward. The first annual Memorial Day drew over 200 people, including the mayor of Oakville and representatives from the State Historical Commission. I helped organize the event, coordinating volunteers and managing logistics. Standing there watching families spread blankets on the grass, children running carefully around the grave markers, elderly residents chatting with the Whitfield family members, I felt something I had not felt in a long time. Genuine community pride. This was what a neighborhood should be. Not perfect lawns and matching mailboxes enforced by petty tyrants, but real people coming together around shared values and mutual respect. The burial ground, which had nearly torn us apart, had instead become the thing that brought us together. In April, I got a call from a reporter working on a follow-up story about the case. She wanted to interview homeowners about how the experience had changed the neighborhood. I agreed to talk to her, and we met at a coffee shop in downtown Oakville. "So what do you think the biggest lesson was?" she asked me, her recorder running. I thought for a moment before answering. "I think the biggest lesson is that leadership matters. When you put people in charge who care more about power and control than about serving the community, bad things happen." Patricia Henderson could have listened to the Whitfield family. She could have done research before starting the project. She could have paused construction when human remains were found. But she did not, because she cared more about being right than about doing right. That cost all of us, financially and morally. "Do you think what happened here could happen in other HOAs?" the reporter asked. "Absolutely," I said. HOAs have enormous power over people's lives and property, but often very little oversight. Board members can make decisions that affect hundreds of families, and homeowners often do not pay attention until it is too late. We got lucky in a way. Yes, we paid a heavy price, but it could have been worse. The lawsuit could have bankrupted the HOA. People could have lost their homes. And more importantly, those graves could have been completely destroyed before anyone realized what was happening. We caught it just in time. The article ran the following week with the headline, "From Desecration to Dedication: How One HOA Learned to Honor the Past." It was generally fair, though it painted Patricia in an even worse light than I would have. The article mentioned that she was currently serving her sentence at a minimum security facility and had declined to be interviewed. Reading about Patricia in prison gave me complicated feelings. I was glad she was facing consequences for her actions, but I also felt a twinge of pity. She had destroyed her own life through arrogance and stubbornness. If she had just listened, just paused, just shown a little humility, none of this would have happened. Instead, she was in prison, her marriage was reportedly falling apart, and she would carry this stain for the rest of her life. But then I thought about the Whitfield family, about Margaret crying as she saw her ancestors' remains disturbed, about Robert's fury and pain, about David's anger on behalf of people he had never met but who were part of his heritage. Patricia's suffering was self-inflicted. The Whitfield family's suffering had been inflicted by others. That was the difference. In May, the community garden produced its first harvest: lettuce, radishes, and herbs. We held a small celebration and people brought dishes made with the garden produce. It was a joyful event, full of laughter and good food, and it struck me how far we had come from those dark days 2 years earlier when the neighborhood had been torn apart by conflict. Dr. Morrison gave a short speech at the celebration. "This garden represents what we can accomplish when we work together with respect and care. Every plant here was chosen by community input. Every bed was built by volunteer labor. This is what an HOA should do: facilitate community connection, not dictate from above. I am proud of what we have built, both literally and figuratively." As summer approached, I found myself spending more and more time at both the burial ground and the community garden. They had become my favorite places in the neighborhood, spaces that felt meaningful in a way that my house, nice as it was, never quite could. These were places built on difficult lessons, paid for with hard-earned money, and maintained through collective effort. One evening in June, I was watering plants in the community garden when Margaret Whitfield arrived. I had not seen her in several months, and I was surprised by her visit. "Thomas, right?" she asked, and I nodded. "I wanted to thank you personally. Robert told me you were one of the first homeowners to push for accountability and settlement. That took courage." "I just did what seemed right," I said, embarrassed by the praise. "A lot of people do not do what seems right when it costs them money," Margaret replied. "You did, and it made a difference. My family will remember that." We talked for a while about how the burial ground was being maintained, about the educational programs the nonprofit was developing, about her family's plans to publish a book documenting the lives of the people buried there. It was a pleasant conversation, and when she left, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. In July, the Meadowbrook Estates HOA received an award from the Pennsylvania Historical and Museum Commission for Historic Preservation. Dr. Morrison accepted the award on behalf of the community at a ceremony in Harrisburg. The award recognized not just the preservation of the burial ground, but the broader commitment to honoring and educating about local history. "This community made a mistake," Dr. Morrison said in her acceptance speech, "but then it made a choice to do better." That is what this award recognizes. Not perfection, but the willingness to learn, change, and commit to higher standards. I accept this on behalf of every homeowner who paid their assessment, every volunteer who helped with restoration, and every person who chose reconciliation over litigation. The award hung in the community center, a tangible reminder of what we had accomplished. But the real award, I thought, was the burial ground itself. peaceful and protected, a place where history lived alongside the present. By August, almost 2.5 years after the initial incident, life in Meadowbrook Estates had found a new equilibrium. The burial ground was a beloved community space. The community garden was thriving. The HOA was running smoothly under competent, ethical leadership. Property values had fully recovered and were actually higher than before the scandal, thanks to the unique historical significance of the neighborhood. I had been living there for 3 years now, and I could not imagine living anywhere else. Yes, I had paid a steep price in that special assessment. Yes, I had spent countless hours on HOA business that I never expected to deal with. But in return, I had become part of something real and meaningful. I had neighbors I knew and trusted. I had a community that shared my values. I had learned lessons about responsibility, justice, and the weight of history that I would carry for the rest of my life. In September, I attended a wedding at the Burial Ground Pavilion. The Whitfield family had opened the space for community events, and a young couple from the neighborhood had asked to hold their ceremony there. It was beautiful, with the memorial stones forming a backdrop that gave weight and significance to the vows being exchanged. "We wanted to get married here," the bride explained during the reception, "because this place represents what we believe in, honoring the past, taking responsibility for mistakes, and building something lasting. That is what we want our marriage to be." I stood at the edge of the gathering, a glass of champagne in my hand, and looked around at my neighbors celebrating together. This was a community now, not just a collection of houses. We had been through fire together, and we had come out stronger. In October, I learned that Patricia Henderson had been released early from prison for good behavior. She had served 18 months of her 2-year sentence. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she was living with her sister in Ohio and working as a cashier at a grocery store. Part of me wondered if she had learned anything from the experience, if she felt remorse for what she had done. But mostly, I just felt grateful that she was no longer part of my life or my community. The Keystone executives had also been released around the same time, and the company itself had gone bankrupt under the weight of lawsuits and regulatory penalties. The development industry in Pennsylvania had apparently taken notice, with new standards being adopted for historical review before construction could begin. In November, as Thanksgiving approached, the Whitfield Family Heritage Foundation organized a gratitude ceremony at the burial ground. The idea was to give thanks not just for the present, but to honor the legacy of those who had come before. Over 100 people showed up despite the cold weather. Robert Whitfield, now in his late 60s and walking with a cane, spoke about gratitude and memory. "My ancestors worked hard, lived honestly, and hoped that when they died they would rest in peace. For a long time they were forgotten, but now, thanks to all of you, they are remembered, they are honored. Their lives meant something not just to my family but to this whole community. For that, I am grateful beyond words." I thought about my own ancestors as he spoke. I did not know where most of them were buried. My family had moved around a lot, and graves had been lost to time and distance. But standing there in that burial ground, I felt connected to all those who had come before, not just the Whitfield family's ancestors, but everyone who had lived and died in the long chain of humanity that led to this moment. As December arrived and the year drew to a close, I reflected on everything that had happened since that March morning when the bulldozers had first rolled into Meadowbrook Estates. It had been nearly 3 years of turmoil, expense, hard work, and difficult lessons. But it had also been 3 years of growth, community building, and meaningful change. At the final HOA meeting of the year, Dr. Morrison announced she would not be running for president again. "I think we have accomplished what we needed to accomplish," she said. "The HOA is on solid footing, the community is strong, and it is time for new leadership to take us into the future. I will stay on the board as a regular member, but someone else should have the opportunity to lead." After some discussion, Marcus Chen was elected as the new president. I agreed to stay on as treasurer for another year. We were all volunteers, giving our time because we cared about the community, not because we wanted power or prestige. In my final act as outgoing treasurer for the year, I presented the annual financial report. Despite all the expenses, despite the special assessment and the legal fees and the restoration costs, the HOA was financially stable. We had learned to be careful with money, to plan ahead, to build reserves. We would never again be caught unprepared for a crisis. As the meeting ended and people filed out into the cold December night, I stayed behind to help clean up. Marcus came over to help me fold chairs. "You know, when this all started, I thought the neighborhood was going to tear itself apart," he said. "I actually considered selling my house and moving somewhere else. I am glad I did not." "Me too," I agreed. "This is home now, in a way that it was not before. We built something here, something that matters." We finished cleaning up and walked out together into the winter night. The burial ground was visible down the street, the memorial stones catching the light from the street lamps. Someone had decorated the pavilion with tasteful white lights for the holidays, making it look like something out of a storybook. I walked home slowly, in no hurry to get out of the cold. I wanted to savor the moment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that we had done the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was expensive, even when it would have been easier to look the away. Tomorrow, I would go to work and deal with sales quotas and difficult clients. But tonight I was just a member of a community that had faced a crisis and emerged stronger. I was a neighbor, a treasurer, a volunteer, a person who had learned that history matters, that justice matters, that doing the right thing matters even when it costs you. The lights were on in my house, warm and welcoming. I had made a good choice when I bought this place, though not for the reasons I had originally thought. It was not about the granite countertops or the finished basement or the convenient location. It was about the community, the connections, the shared values, and collective responsibility. As I unlocked my door and stepped inside, I thought about those memorial stones one more time, about the people resting beneath them, about the Whitfield family who had fought so hard to protect their ancestors' graves. They would be at peace now, truly at peace, watched over by a community that had learned to honor the past while building the future. And that, I thought as I closed the door behind me, was worth every penny of that $4,000 assessment.